G'day, hey, hi, and welcome. Finally, my computer's working normal again. Back to making Windows Movie Maker, so this is good. I finally got the updates and everything's sort of working, knock wood. Okay, so today's video is going to be light bikes versus heavy bikes. Why is this an important topic? Well, it's kind of simple. If you're learning how to ride a motorcycle, you will probably find out very quickly that a heavy bike is very stable, but when you get into trouble with a heavy bike, you're in real trouble, meaning when you lose balance on a heavy bike, you go down. Now, on a light bike, you're more likely to be twitching all over the place, so to speak, and stuff like that, but usually you can save the bike, especially, like, for example, like the end of my drive here, which is all beach sand. If you're not used to that, my bike only weighs 374 pounds empty weight. So it's probably under 450 with the battery and the fuel and everything else and the oil. So it's a bike that if something were to happen at a light or something like that, or if I didn't stop quite perfectly aligned, it might be a little bit more forgiving rather than dropping it. Where if something you're riding something really top heavy or big, or you have a passenger on the back or luggage or whatever, some of these adventure bikes tend to have a very high center of gravity. You don't really notice it until you basically come to a stop and your front end always has to be straight when you're stopping. If not, you'll it's kind of like jackknifing the bike a bit, and you'll tend to feel the weight go off into the direction of opposite of where you're steering, and it feels like the bike wants to fall over. And this is what gets a lot of heavy tour bike riders. They'll be coming down like a big hill or something like that, go to stop, and they don't use enough back brake, and the bike becomes unstable. And just as they're turning, and next thing you know, they're turning left, right, doesn't really matter. When they use the front brake, it just kind of throws all the weight opposite of the bike. And even with their leg out, sometimes they just can't, they'll fall over in slow motion because they just can't hold all that weight. So that's one of the things about heavy bikes and light bikes. However, heavy bikes have a huge advantage when you're out on the highway, especially this time of year. We're in October right now, and I just did ride number 79 today this year, so I got a lot of riding in, considering I only got the bike on the road at the end of July. Not too bad. My goal was 80 runs, so tomorrow I'll be doing the 80th run. But it's very cold right now, but the wind is very powerful right now, especially in that colder wind. I find tends to push your bike around. This bike's not too bad, but it is light. You do feel the wind a bit, but with the fairing, it cuts through the wind. I remember on my LTE 440, that bike was probably around the same weight as this bike, maybe even lighter, maybe a little heavier. It's hard to say. I can't remember. It was probably around the 400-pound mark anyway. But that bike was like a bumblebee in a windstorm. It was just any sort of breeze whatsoever. Every truck that passed you, everything just kind of knocked you around because the wind was just so. I guess the bike wasn't as aerodynamic as this bike, and it just blew you all over the place. Plus, it wasn't as powerful. My other bike, my BMW R60, that bike was 600 pounds or 595, just about 600 pounds. That thing, it could be you could ride it through a tornado. And it wasn't even a full out tour bike. It was just, kind of like sport touring / kind of calf racer-ish looking. But yeah, it was a heavy bike. It was really good on the open road, even with skinny tires that it had. It was really good. That type of thing. Now, I have ridden other bikes like older Goldwings. I haven't ridden any new tour bikes, but one of the bikes, the heaviest bike I think I've ridden in the last little while, was when I was doing my course last year. Again, just to recap for those who might be joining in the first time, I used to ride about 20 years ago. Then my license expired, and I had to get it again from Ontario to Quebec, and so last year I did it again. And one of the bikes you learn on, or there's two bikes you learn on. You learn on what they call a Suzuki Boulevard, or used to be called a Suzuki Savage. It's a 650cc thumper. A great little commuter bike, a lot of fun. It's a single cylinder, so a lot of torque and stuff like that. But definitely not a highway bike. Like you blow around on it a bit. It wasn't bad, but it was heavy enough, but not quite heavy enough. You know what I mean? Good commuter bike. Long range tour, you might be, find it a little bit too light for, really stable heavy touring. Then the other bike was the SB650, which was the Yamaha, or sorry, the V-Star 650, and that thing I think was close to 700 pounds on spec. It was like 650 or 700 pounds. A very underpowered bike, in my opinion. For that, for mind you, they make 1100s, 800s. They make all kinds of in that. I think in that same frame. But the 650 one, it was a very stable ride, even in the wind, because it was so heavy. That type of thing. So it would have been a good tour bike had it been just a little bit more powerful. You know what I mean? If it was a 750, maybe it would have just had a little bit more powerful. But I think they made like an 800 and an 1100. I can imagine the 1100 would be just an awesome bike to ride on the highway. I did ride a Goldwing years ago. I think it was a 1200. And then I think I might have rode another one that might have been a 1500. Those were big, heavy bikes, but they were weird because even though they handled well at low speed, the fairing was kind of top heavy, and it wasn't uncommon to have Goldwings come into the shop with damaged fairings because these bikes would fall over all the time. The wind would catch them. When they're on the center stand, never on the side stand, but when they're on the center stand. That's the other thing. All my light bikes on the side stands, the wind would blow them over. My LTD 440, the wind knocked it over at least 10 times in a span of a season. So with a light bike, kind of be mindful when you're parking in the wind. It will knock it over. I do worry about, especially on this bike, the side stand's not too bad, but it is a little bit short. I always found Yamahas had really short side stands, and next thing you know, you come back and the bike's like blown over on its side. Literally got blown over because it was so light. My 48 panhead, never a problem because that thing was like a tank. It was all, the only aluminium on the bike I think was the crankcase and the tranny case. Everything else was either steel or cast iron. So it was a pretty heavy bike, even though it was a chopper. It was well over 400 pounds, probably closer to 5. So again, the same thing. It didn't blow around in the wind, but like the Goldwing and stuff like that. Like again, you'd ride it through a tornado. It was heavy, but the problem is sometimes the weight was a bit up high, especially when you have a lot of passengers and stuff like that. You got to be careful because even though the bikes are designed for those kind of loads, if you don't distribute the loads properly when you come to a stop, let's say you have one saddlebag that's got like 50-pound weights in it, and the other one's got like feathers in it. Well, you're gonna have one side of the bike heavier than the other, and that could affect you. How you load the bike can affect how you stop. It could throw your balance off, and when you throw your balance off, that's when you dump the bike. So with a heavy bike, yes, it's more stable. It tracks better a lot of times in the rough weather. But the big thing to watch out for is that when you do load them up, that you load them up with an even distributed of weight. This is any motorcycle. The lighter ones, you'll notice it right away because you're lighter, you'll notice it. One of the things you notice, especially on a light bike, is when you have a passenger on the back, the front end almost becomes completely weightless. And when you go to turn, you notice that you can't. There's like your front tire's actually not gripping anything. I've noticed that on the really light bikes. On the slightly heavier bikes, you don't get that as much. Where there's somebody on the back, but it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like there's no weight on the front whatsoever. So you do notice these things after time when you ride a bunch of different bikes. Should you start on a heavy bike? Should you start on a light bike? I think you're probably better off to start on a lighter bike, just because it's more forgiving. Even though you're more likely to knock it over because it's light and you blow around a lot more, but it responds quicker. So with the big bikes, they don't respond as quick. But when you start losing the balance on a big bike, you lose the like you can't hold it. It's just you got a bike that's 1,000 pounds, literally a Goldwing, fully loaded with 2 people on it, is literally a ton going down the road. The bike's 900 pounds. Well, the newer ones might be a lot lighter, but the older ones were about 800, 900 pounds, 1,100 pounds, that type of thing. These big, heavy tour bikes, again, they track really well, but if you offset the weight, when they decide to go down, it's like an elephant. When it decides to sit down, you can't stop it. It's just going to do it. It's more forgiving, but depending on your rider skills, this is where the light bikes can tend to teach you a lot about your weight balance and stuff like that, and how to respond. But until you get your brakings, your slow speed handling down, your braking down, usually that's when you're going to have, like, if you're going to down the bike, it's going to usually statistically be in the first year, and it's usually going to be some sort of low speed thing, or you're going to knock it over or something like that. But yeah, I did have with the light bikes. That's one thing you got to watch out for them is when you park them and it's a windy day, just be mindful of the direction it's parked in, because you can come out to a bike toppled on the side. That's happened to quite a few bikes. Putting light bikes on a center stand, that's another problem. Center stands, that'd be good. Things to watch out for center stand. Hot pavement and center stands don't mix. I'll just say that. Even side stands, it's a good idea to put something on your side stand so it doesn't dig into the pavement. But yeah, it's just an interesting topic. I don't know. I don't see anybody else covering it. Light bikes versus heavy bikes. Obviously, the obvious things like acceleration and stuff like that. Light over might. You don't need as much power to propel a light bike as you do a heavy bike. Traction. A heavy bike, has more weight on it. It might have better traction sometimes. But like anything, you can judge it basically after riding it. You can judge it for the handling characteristics you get. But usually, typically, tour bikes and cruisers are going to be heavier than sport bikes and dirt bikes and commuters, right? So that's typical. So what's better? Well, there's tool to the job is more the question here. What is it you want to do? But would I start off on a really heavy bike? Probably not. Not until you get the basic fundamentals down. Just because, like I say, it's going to be more forgiving until it's not. You know what I mean? Whereas the light bikes, yeah, they're a little more twitchy, but you can usually save them a lot easier. All right, anyway, have yourselves a great day.